Unless we build it now. United States, Africa, we salute ya. A new state of mind, I introduce ya. Close your eyes and visualize the rise of a new paradigm. Solar powered skyscrapers.
Welcome to the Africa Must Unite podcast, a podcast dedicated to inspiring African people worldwide to rise up, organize, and struggle for Pan-Africanism, a unified, liberated, socialist Africa, the only permanent solution to the exploitation and oppression of African people, no matter where they happen to be born or happen to live in the world. Now please, welcome the hosts of Africa Must Unite.
Africa's future is now, so get ready.
Greetings, I'm Brother Neil.
And I'm Mama D, and we are the Africa Must Unite podcast, and we are also the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party, PRSP, Pan-African and Revolutionary greetings to you.
Yeah, throughout the year, we bring you events from our calendar, and I'm going to discuss some of the calendar dates.
And before you do that, though, we want to deal with our opening statement that, Neil, we've been making all year long. So that opening statement on our theme for this year. And we like to explain that. All of our Africa Must Unite AMU podcasts are guided by the content of our annual calendars. And the themes of our calendars are always guided by what the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party perceives as the most pressing issue confronting our people worldwide, the most pressing issue standing in the way of our liberation. This year, 2024, perceiving the need for our people to unite around one theory, one ideology, in order to more effectively and more quickly bring about our liberation, Pan-Africanism, our focus has been on Nkrumaism, the ideology that we believe should unite all African people, shining the way forward to our liberation. And this month, December 2024, we focus on the most important liberation strategy that will ensure our success, building an all-African committee for the political coordination of all of our people, for our revolutionary Pan-African socialist organizations throughout the globe. And we're going to talk more about that, but as usual, as you were beginning to say, Neil, we always start off with a few important dates in our history as a people and in the history of other progressive revolutionary people.
Yes, and for the month of December, I'm just going to mention just a few of these dates, but it's difficult to choose because every day of the month on the calendar has something important. So this is why this calendar is such a great thing to have in your home. It's a great teaching tool and organizing tool as well. So I'm going to start with December the 5th, and this was the date that the first All-African Peoples Conference was held, and it was held in Accra, Ghana in 1958. A year after gaining independence, Kwame Nkrumah called a conference to gather in women's organizations, youth organizations, labor organizations, liberation organizations throughout the continent to begin the process of a mass movement-based movement toward a unified socialist Africa. Robert Sobukwe, who later became leader of ZANU in Zimbabwe, was born December the 8th, 1925, and on December the 10th, in 1954, dozens of African women were killed in Namibia as a result of a mass protest. Namibian Women's Day has been put together to commemorate that brutality. ZAPU, Zimbabwe African People's Union, was formed to fight settler colonialism in what was then called Rhodesia, what we now know as liberated Zimbabwe, was formed in 1961. And ZAPU, along with ZANU, came together to form the Patriotic Front later on. So those are just some of the important dates of the year that I want to mention, but just one last one. For those of you who might be driving around in your cars and so forth, and you have to remember that on December the 6th, an African by the name of R.B. Spikes patented the automatic gear shift. This was December the 6th, 1932.
Those are some real key important dates. And as you said, this is one of those months that every date is filled, and not just with one important date, but sometimes with three, up to three important date information on one day of the month in December. So that is phenomenal, and just it's not phenomenal for us. It's phenomenal that our people. We always say our people are always making history, no matter if we recorded it or not. But this month of December, you can see the record of some of the record of our people's contribution to Africans. So what we want to do is read what we had for our calendar in December. So this is what we have for December 2024. It starts off with the actual focus. Organize the masses, build the All-African Committee for Political Coordination. And it starts with a quote from Kwame Nkrumah from the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, pages 56 and 57. And what he says is, quote, an All-African Committee for Political Coordination, AACPC, should be established to act as a liaison between all parties which recognize the urgent necessity of conducting an organized and unified struggle against colonialism and neo-colonialism, end quote. And then we go on to write this. Kwame Nkrumah has consistently maintained that the unification of Africa is necessary if our people worldwide are to ever fully emerge from the oppression and degradation that we have experienced as a result of slavery, capitalism, colonialism, and neo-colonialism. This unification must come, however, through revolutionary class struggle waged throughout the length and breadth of Africa and the entire African world, and through the unification of our revolutionary forces. While we currently have many excellent revolutionary organizations and parties, our effectiveness will be multiplied when we work together in a coordinated fashion. According to Nkrumah, therefore, in Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, this will require the uniting of revolutionary Pan-African organizations in an All-African Committee for Political Coordination, the AACPC, which will serve to plan, coordinate, and direct all phases of the African revolutionary struggle, from mass movements to armed struggle. In proposing this strategy, Nkrumah and Nkrumaism, our ideology, definitely shines the light forward to building a strong revolutionary union of African socialist states, a unified socialist Africa. So that's what we wrote and for our calendar for this month of December. And what we'd like to do now is to get into some more details about how this coordination will happen. How do we organize our masses and also build an All-African Committee for Political Coordination? And Brother Neil, you're going to help us greatly with that. And I'll chime in from time to time. But we're going to start off with this very first important question that goes to the theme of this 2024 calendar. How does Nkrumaism shine the way forward in organizing the masses of our people?
Well, Nkrumah does several things. Nkrumaism does several things. And the first thing that it does is to identify the masses. Who are the masses? When we talk about organize the masses, who actually are we organizing? So in his book, Class Struggle in Africa, Kwame Nkrumah looks at who the organized or who the masses are. One, he points to the working class. And he said in Africa, the working class is, and at that time, relatively small and still relatively small, but growing, is going to be the critical element. One of the things he points out is that although it's relatively small, its leadership is going to be tremendously important. And he pointed out that the Communist Party in China was able to move forward even when the working class itself was only like 3% of the overall society at that time. So that working class is very important. And one of the things that we should also remember is that Africa's working class is often outside of Africa. In Europe, for instance, especially in the more recent years, in settler colonies and domestic colonies like the United States and Brazil, the workers here are African workers here are part of the African working class as well. He also points out that the peasants, especially the small and poor peasants, are going to be absolutely critical because they are where the the rural areas in particular, the countryside, is going to be the base for much of the liberation fighting that's going to have to occur, that will occur, that it's occurring. Also, the people working in the mines and those working on these large plantation systems of rural workers. So all of these are part of the masses. He also says that you have this petty bourgeoisie, which is not necessarily part of the masses as such, but the most conscious elements of that petty bourgeoisie has to break with the neo-colonial system and move toward the masses and work with the masses to achieve liberation. The second thing that Nkrumaism does is to identify the enemy. And we have to be very careful here because there are a lot of ideas floating around. And we say clearly that the main enemy, the main focus of our problem is capitalism, imperialism, and especially as it has morphed, let's say, into neo-colonialism, a neo-colonial expression of capitalism and imperialism. Those are our main enemies. That's the main thing that we are fighting against. That's what we have to aim. When we organize the masses, we have to develop strategies and tactics to attack that enemy, in the way that it is expressed in the conditions where we encounter it. We also have to identify what Nkrumah calls the enemy within. This is the fourth rule, point number 14 of the rules of discipline in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. Especially in a period that we're in now, where Pan-Africanism is growing, especially on the continent, but throughout the African world, we're going to see a lot of pretenders come up and use some aspects of the language of our movement. And we have to be very clear what our movement is about, what our objective is, and how we move toward that objective. And that's why, as we talked about last month, we need this ideology that we all tightly agree on and move toward and are guided by. The other thing that, in terms of the enemy within, we have to look at the classes within, and particularly those bourgeois elements within our community, within the African world, especially on the continent, who are tied in with the imperialist world and serve to promote capitalism, imperialism, and neo-colonialism and oppress and assist in the oppressed of the masses of our people. And lastly, and very importantly, Nkrumaism identifies the strategy for success. That is, it tells us what we need to do in order to organize the masses to be successful.
You know, I just want to add a point before we go to that next question I have for you. But, even in the handbook, when you look at the rules of discipline that's there, I think since that time we have come to look also not only at that neo-colonial puppet that he's talking about, that bourgeois element that is willing to sell themselves, and sell their people to enrich or empower themselves. But we have to recognize, and we've started to talk about this, that is the enemy within all of us individually, because we've all been shaped and socialized by our enemy, capitalism and all of its manifestations. So we have to also pay attention to how we are moving. You can't have socialism without those budding socialists who are going to try to go a different path from the enemy. So when we look at ourselves, we have to say, what is that in us that is a reflection of our principal enemy and these other neo-colonial puppets that exist. And I think we've added that, Neil, as you know, in terms of recent discussions, that we have to change ourselves as well, if need be. So we want to rid ourselves, whether it's in terms of gender question or whether it's in terms of arrogance and selfishness, self-centeredness, self-righteousness, all these things that are individualism, that are the products of living in a capitalist world. So I just wanted to add that point, or those points, before we get to the next question.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, and that shows also the importance of, like you said, trying to live that ideology from day to day, and really the whole idea of criticism, and especially self-criticism, and collectively and individually as you go about your day-to-day life and routine. I think that's an extremely important point that you have raised.
An important point that you make, because our best teacher, as we've learned long ago when we first joined Revolutionary Organization, is being inside of Revolutionary Organization and studying collectively and trying to practice our theory. And like you said, that's such an important point, the role of criticism and self-criticism to help shape us for the world that we are struggling to bring into existence for the liberated and socialist Africa. But the question I had next is, for accomplishing our objective, trying to come up with a strategy for success, what do you recommend?
Well, basically three things here. And one is to, like we always say, go to the people. Again, point number 15 on the rules of discipline in the handbook: always be a servant of the people. And so we have to go to the people and go to the people to learn from the people. And also at the same time, so this is a dialectical process. We're learning and we're also sharing in the form of political education, so we can assist the people as they organize themselves. There's a great deal of leadership that exists among our people. There's a great deal of people have made a summing up themselves of what the contradictions are. But we have to deepen that with the what we've learned from Nkrumaism and in terms of political education. So that political education we have to share with the people as we are learning and organizing and working with them. So we're assisting here with the leadership development of the masses, and as we do, we have to work to engage with the contradictions that capitalism, imperialism, and neo-colonialism present in the various locations of the global African world that we find ourselves in. Especially, we have to look at how it not only oppresses us and exploits us, but we also have to look at how it serves to disunify us, and we have to come up with the countering tactics. And then, very importantly, and most importantly, really, to bring this thing all the way to fruition, we have to build what we call the AACPC, or the All African Committee for Political Coordination. As the theme for the month read, across the global African world, we have many, many, many excellent revolutionary forces, Pan-African forces, African forces that are doing great work. And each one of these organizations brings something different to the table. Some have had vast experience in organizing workers under all sorts of adverse conditions. Others have had experience in terms of working, organizing, let's say, women's organizations. Some have organized landless movements. Others have organized students and intellectuals and so forth. Each of these movements, and there are others, that we can't just go down the list because there's so many of them that we've had this history of. All of them are important, and all of them are essential. Some have had experience organizing outside of of Africa, in the throughout the North America, South America, Europe, etc. Others have had experience working in maybe the Horn or West Africa, the Sahel, Southern Africa, but our enemy is a global enemy. And none of those struggles in isolation can defeat our enemy. Our enemy is international. Our enemy has consolidated itself in a series of interlocking organizations that Nkrumah points out in his book, Neo-Colonialism. And in order for us to defeat that enemy, we have to be just as well integrated, sharing information, sharing strategy and tactics, assisting each other to make the final push. We also must understand that many of our organizations understand the necessity, in order for us to be successful as a people, for Pan-Africanism. That Pan-Africanism, the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism, is the absolute necessity for the liberation of our people. Without it, we don't make it. And however, we cannot unify Africa without first unifying African revolutionary. So the AACPC, and it doesn't have to be called that name, that's absolutely important.
And you make, oh, sorry, Neil, you were going to.
Yeah, just one other thing, and while we're saying that, I also want to point out there's also been some movement towards that. We're seeing more collaboration of Pan-African forces. We've seen a number of forces having Pan-African forces, and some people who may not even call themselves Pan-Africanism, but who are working in that Pan-Africanists, and who work in that direction. We see a number of folks just going to Niger recently, moving toward some understanding and seeing these forces coming together. We've also seen the consolidation of revolutionary parties coming together. We've seen some of these parties recently, and organizations going into Cuba, where they had made many of these discussions going forward. So we see many of this movement is already in the, I would say, the early stages of coming to that. But as a movement overall, we have to be conscious, and we have to really motivate ourselves to move as far as we can on that path. In our local areas, we have to form similar type of committees to move as far as we can toward this unification of African revolutionary forces, Pan-African forces, so that we can continue the path toward the unification of Africa itself.
And such a beautiful and insightful points, Neil, especially tying in the diaspora in this whole thing. Because in 1968, when Kwame Nkrumah, or before then, because it's published in 1968, when Nkrumah is calling for an AACPC, he says the formation of a political party linking all liberated territories and struggling parties under a common ideology will smooth the way for eventual continental unity, and will at the same time greatly assist the prosecution of the All African People's War. Such a brilliant statement, and of course so relevant, but his focus at that time was mostly on, totally, on those political parties at home. Because there you're talking about liberated territories and all. We have since, because of the material reality that we live in and our understanding of what's going on now in terms of our enemy, we have said that all revolutionary Pan-African organizations globally need to be a part of this AACPC. And the other thing that we brought to the table in these times is the fact that we don't have to all belong to the same organization, but we need to belong, as you said, Neil, to this coordinated political committee. We do need that, but at this time, we might not all belong to the same organization, and that's all right. But we need to see the necessity of a common ideology. We need to see the necessity of coming together, as you said, so that we can more effectively politically educate, which is so sorely needed, our people at this time. And we can more effectively do that. The first step toward building Pan-Africanism is to know who your enemy is, to know who you are, to know what our strategy is, of course, organization, to know our objective, Pan-Africanism. We have to know all of these things so we can be on the same page. So it such a wonderful thing that you brought in, that whole idea of the global connection in terms of this committee, that all those interested in revolution and Pan-Africanism should come together as organizations into this coordinated body, the AACPC. So, we wanted to end on that note. Last month we dealt with the necessity of a monolithic ideological unity. And this one follows very well with, coming together in this AACPC, and in order to more effectively bring about Pan-Africanism, a unified socialist Africa. So,
yeah,
I'm sorry, Neil.
Yeah, we see it happening every day. I mean, especially among the youth. We have comrades in Ghana who just mentioned that not so long ago we had youth from all over, especially West Africa, but all over Africa, had just shown up, and it shook the government. All these youth they were talking about, and they were coming together for Pan-Africanism. We see youth in Senegal who are now moving forward. They've been protesting. They've been fighting. They've been facing a gunshot and tear gas, and they are moving forward. And they're saying, our elders have brought us this far. We're going to continue the struggle. Throughout the Sahel, we're seeing the masses say, hey, we're ejecting the French and we have to unify. Those of us in the Sahel who moved to kick out the French, we are beginning to come together. We see the youth in Kenya and also to some extent Uganda being and beginning to really give the government and the powers that be real problems as they begin not only to organize around the issues inside of those countries, but for instance, they raise up the question in Kenya. They're raising up not only oppression and Kenya and exploitation in Kenya, but they raise up the question of complicity with the United States, of the Kenyan government being in complicity with the United States with their brothers and sisters in Haiti. So, and in South Africa, we have the ongoing, continuing ongoing struggle that's being raised around these issues in year out. And finally, in the Congo, we're beginning to see rising up out of that place where there's been so much death and destruction, continued death and destruction, another vanguard of youth looking at how you tying that together. Youth in the Sudan, in the Horn. You have youth in the Horn, despite those divisions all throughout the Horn. You have committees of youth from different aspects of the Horn who are trying to pull this thing together. And in the Europe, we begin to see Europe forming domestic colonies similar to the domestic colonies inside of the United States. And you see African workers, for instance, in France, farm workers forming Pan-African farm groups where you have different Africans of different countries working on these plantations. They have formed Pan-African agricultural labor unions. And so the material, and then we see even in India, where we have a large African population and that we don't talk about much, organizing and being part of this global African world emerge. Similarly, we see in Brazil, Colombia, all of these places, we see this African beginning to rise up in an organized faction, understanding their linkages, both political, economic, and cultural, to Africa and to each other. So all we need now, or the main thing we need now, is the organizational form, the AACPC, to kind of pull that together.
Definitely. And it's so wonderful that you brought up our youth, and the importance of our youth. Youth are the spark of the African Revolution, we know. And so, that such a body as the AACPC, so necessary in the political education of our youth, is so necessary, as you said, essential in the liberation and unification of Africa and in building socialism. So I'm so happy you mentioned that, and I'm so happy you referred to our next year's calendar, and we're going to mention it in a minute. But we just wanted to say, all throughout 2024, we've had, with the help of guests sometimes, our focus has been on our 2024 theme of our calendar, Nkrumaism, shining the way forward through the crisis in today's African world. And I hope you've been enjoying these 12 podcasts throughout this year. So that's what we've been doing.
Yeah, so join us next month when we present you with our brand new 2025 calendar with the theme, A Unified Socialist Africa is not only possible, it's coming.
And that's what you've been talking about, Neil. You've been laying the groundwork for showing us that it's coming. Sometimes we say it's on the horizon, but when you look at the conditions, the motion of our enemy, and the understanding of the value of our continent to the world, and the disruption that's going on throughout our homeland, what we're going to talk about all next year, each month, is showing data and proof that a unified socialist Africa is not only possible, it's coming. And our new 2025 calendar will be out at the end of next week. So we hopefully share that calendar with you and hope you're interested in receiving one. Meanwhile, visit our website, Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party.org. Email us at panafricanrsp@gmail.com. Like us on SoundCloud.com for all of our podcasts. And visit us on YouTube. You'll find us there.
Remember, organization is the key. Join us, the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party, or some other revolutionary Pan-African socialist organization. A union of African socialist states is on the horizon.
It's
Look
coming.
out. It's coming.
It is coming, as our new 2025 calendar will say. Okay, Aluta continua. We'll see you next year in January.
We struggle. Lies the rule and protect our life. Roman and Africans with African pride. Fighting to attain our rights. One no more shedding of blood. For a nation to move forward. Africans with African pride. Fighting to attain our rights. One no more shedding of blood. For this nation to move forward. But make we can all unite. Put each man difference aside. Why can't we just come together? See some tribal wars and fight. Who knows better must do better. A source of collective insight may not be exposed to education, but surely knows from right. Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights. Want no more shedding of blood for this nation to move forward. Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights. Want no more shedding of blood for this nation to move forward. Say, hey, we need a motivation. Teach I to be self-sufficient. Don't want to depend on no one for attainment of my brain. Oh, these words are my calling. Children crying white squad tears. Hunger rampant harvest plenty. Ooh, oh, Africans with African pride. Fighting to attain our rights. Want no more shedding of blood for any nation to move forward. Africans with African pride. Fighting to attain our rights. Oh, 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 Free Africa, free Africa, a free Indian Africa, free Africa, to all entire Africa, free Africa, whoa, whoa, yeah, Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights, one no more shedding of blood, for this nation to move forward, Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights, one no more shedding of blood, for this nation to move forward. Put each man difference aside. Why can't we just come together? Seize this tribal war and fight. Who know that I must do better? A force of collective inside may not be exposed to education, but surely knows from right. Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights. Want no more shedding of blood for this nation to move forward. Africans with African pride, fighting to attain our rights. Want no more shedding of blood for this nation to move forward. Want no more shedding of blood for this nation to move forward. Want no more shedding of blood.